Hi guys, you're watching the Watch Hobbyist channel with me, Wayne, and today we're going to look at the Grand Seiko diver. So this is the SBGA229, and this is basically the current model as of 2018. Now, it's a watch that I would never have thought I would ever buy, and the reason is that I'm a massive Seiko fan. I absolutely love Seiko, but I've never had a Grand Seiko until recently. Now, a few weeks ago I ended up with this, which hopefully by now you've seen the review of, and then a few days ago in a sale this came up. So this is the diver, like I say, and I was so impressed with the quality of the white dial watch we see here that I thought, why not? You know, the price seemed right, I'll go for this. But one thing I wasn't sure at all about was actually the dimensions of the watch. Now, on paper, when you look at all the sales blurb and everything, this sounds like it's going to rival a Deep Sea for size. Now, I have a Deep Sea here, which I'm actually going to compare to in a moment, but you won't believe the difference in size. This watch is actually much more wearable than I ever imagined, and I'll show you a wrist shot in a short while. But there are also a couple of things that I'm a little bit disappointed with on this watch, I must admit. So obviously I was buying the watch sight unseen, it was over the internet, but I did the same thing with this watch, and this watch is impressive in every single regard, whereas this one, as impressive as it certainly is. I'm not saying it's not an impressive watch, but there's just a couple of things that have let it down for me, and like I say, it's just a slight bit of disappointment. It's a first world issue, it's not a big problem, but there are just a couple of things, and I thought it'd be better to touch on those first. But I want you to know that the overall view of this watch is very, very positive, but there are just these things. So the first one is, if you're looking at this watch like myself, you probably think that's a ceramic bezel. It looks like a ceramic bezel, it has the same kind of finish, doesn't look like any aluminium bezel I've ever seen, but actually it's not a ceramic bezel, it's some kind of enamel paint or something like that. So probably very impressive the way it was created and things like that. Apparently there is some special way to easily remove the bezel for cleaning the watch after it's been in the sea as well. So a very, very advanced bezel, but unfortunately, even though this is the latest version with the GS logo at the top, I need to actually, I'll just adjust the time so you can see that, but even though this is the very, very latest version, because there was a previous model to this, unfortunately they haven't added a ceramic bezel to it. So there are a couple of pictures along the internet that you'll find where there's scratches on the bezel, but I'm not at all bothered about that. It's just that I would expect at this sort of price point to have something along those lines. Now, I have read something somewhere that Seiko would see ceramic as less functional. They are all about function, let's face it. They would see it as less functional, and therefore it would possibly shatter, and they don't want that to happen. The last thing you want is some kind of watch failure to stop you knowing where you're up to with your air when you're underwater or whatever. So that does make sense, it makes complete sense. But let's not forget, Seiko do have things like Dia Shield and all these coatings that they can offer, yet I see pictures on the internet where the bezel has been scratched. So it just seems a bit at odds with Seiko's general philosophy, because they're very, very good at producing very durable products, and in this case they just seem to have, for me personally, they've just let it down a little bit there. But I'm really not moaning that much, because the actual luster of the bezel looks fantastic. It's got this great deep blackness to it, like a real shine to it, and it's also very, very flat, so it has nice reflections. Also, the numbers that you see and the markers have like a relief to them, so they are embossed in some way, so they're not just literally painted on the top. So you know, it's a very well thought out bezel. It's just the material seems just a little bit odd in 2018 compared to the competition, but maybe that's a nice thing. But it's certainly something you should know about if you are buying one of these. The other thing is, obviously we have a Grand Seiko. So Grand Seiko are all about having incredible quality, attention to detail, and that is completely the case apart from this clasp. So the bracelet itself feels like it would last through a nuclear war. It's very, very tough. It does have pins, which I'm a bit surprised about. It's rather than having screws, it has pins. Again, something I was reading said that screws can back out under duress, basically falling out of the watch. I've never had that happen myself. And the other thing as well is pins aren't that great over time either. They do tend to sort of stretch and things like that. So although the pins are very thick on this watch, there's pros and cons to both sides. And I would just expected maybe a screwed bezel, a screwed bracelet, because this watch here is 2008 and that has screws in the bracelet. So I would have hoped for the same scenario, but it doesn't have that. So obviously right now I'm sounding really, really negative. I promise you this is going to be an overall very positive review because the watch is incredible. But I just thought I'd get the negatives out of the way first of all. Like I say, this clasp really lets the side down in my opinion. Now, as a sort of technological advancement in clasps, I'm sure many years ago this made a big advancement, but it does have some good sides and some bad sides. The bad side is it's all stamped metal, and what you go from this beautiful bracelet, thick solid bracelet, to this much thinner metal, stamped metal clasp, and it just seems at odds with the bracelet. And you would think by now, with this being generation 2 of the watch, that they would have maybe developed something else. It just seems a little bit strange, but it is very secure. It has pins here that hold the security lock in place, but the security lock is also stamped metal, and obviously that's one of the areas that you're going to touch when you take the watch off or put the watch on, and that just straight away doesn't give you the same quality feel as you get from this watch here, where this has just basically an inline clasp. Feels very, very solid. It feels very different basically, and this stamped metal security lock just feels a bit thin and not quite how you would expect on a Grand Seiko. It's very, very similar to this normal Seiko diver that I have here, and this is around about 1/10 the price of this watch. So that gives you an idea of that. But obviously, well, not obviously, but actually this clasp basically has a bit of a party trick. So it's extendable. So as you can see now, it just opens as normal. It looks like a normal clasp to a point. But if I then move this section back, I can then extend the clasp, so it has like a ratchet system, and obviously that can be used for diving. It can be used for if your wrist expands on a hot day, that type of thing. But the problem with it is it's very sensitive. So I've found that sometimes when I've taken the watch off, I've pushed it a bit too far and it's extended the clasp, like just by mistake. Then I have to do that, put it back in. Just feels a little bit fiddly. And although I totally understand the functionality of it and the reason for it doing that, I think it just could have been executed a little bit better. Maybe some kind of locking mechanism or something like that. Maybe there is a new clasp in the works, who knows, but it just seems a bit at odds with the rest of the watch, because really if you take this section away, you have probably the highest quality diver's watch I have ever come across. And that leads me to the positives of this watch. Firstly, it's very difficult, I think, to ever portray in images and in videos the quality of a watch. And the quality can come in different ways. First of all, it can come in the weight of the watch. So ideally, you want something that feels a little bit heavy, because that adds to the quality feel of something. Obviously we have metals like titanium available and things like that, but they can sometimes feel a little bit cheap, whereas this is a proper steel solid diver, and boy does it feel solid as well. But it's not heavy, it's not massively heavy, it's a really nice weight that's not too unbalanced. It really wears really well. But then you start looking closer at the watch. Now, this is the type of watch that you buy and 5 years later you're still noticing little things, little nuances that you didn't realise before. Things like the crystal is very, very thick, but it's actually set below the level of the bezel. Now, quite often you will find that like a really thick crystal on a diver's watch will stick above the bezel. In some ways that's better because the crystal is less likely to get scratched than the bezel in this case, but it also gives it a really much more unique appearance, and I think it's really nice to see a diver's watch that's rated to 200 meters and can probably do an awful lot more than that, because really 200 meters doesn't seem a lot these days, even though most people would never go anywhere near that. But it's a really thick crystal that's just sort of like lowered down into the case, and it just works really, really nicely. Then you start looking at the polishing of the watch. I mean, you are talking like polished chamfered edges everywhere. Inside the links, outside the links, inside the end links and the lugs. It just all is so well done. I mean, basically this watch is hand polished, hand assembled. This is basically as close as I feel that you get to haute horology, but at a reasonable price point. They really do take it to that level, and I think that's why it's so hard to really justify the cost of a watch like this until you actually see the watch in the metal and in the you're actually holding it. Now you'll see, just going back to the bezel, it is a fingerprint magnet without a doubt. There are fingerprints all over it. I'm going to try and just get rid of those so it looks a bit nicer on camera. But there is one more negative thing that I would point out, and it's probably doesn't mean anything at all. It's really it's not going to affect things, but you can see that the end of the minute hand towards the center actually covers some of the hour hand, and that just bugs me a little bit. I'd like it to be more where you can see the full hour hand all the time, because what it actually does is it covers some of the luminescence, which there's already plenty of luminescence on that hour hand, absolutely loads of it. And you're not going to struggle to see this watch in any situation, whether it's pitch black or bright daylight, but it does cover some of that lume, and as a result of that, obviously it's making it a little bit harder to read the hour theoretically at night. Also, the seconds hand is incredibly long, and what it does is when it overlaps the minute hand, it actually goes further than the minute hand towards the minute track. So that's probably the longest seconds hand I've ever seen. It's just little things like that just detract from such an incredible watch, because really, this watch has an amazing movement. The attention to detail on the case and the bracelet is second to none. I really don't think I've ever seen sort of such great polishing at this price point, and probably a lot higher price points as well when I've looked at other watches. Going into more the polishing side of it. So as I say, this is hand polished. It's hand polished, and it has polishing that is next level. So if you're used to Rolex, Omega, big brands like that, I personally think that this is way above. It's the type of watch that you look at a curved surface, but you appear flat when you look at it. It's really incredible how they do this polishing, and it really becomes a part of the watch. That normally you just look at a watch that's polished and has satin edges, and you don't really take too much notice. In this case, you really, really do. You can't help but notice like this luster that it has, like not many other watches I've ever seen have. And what helps as well is it seems to have really good anti-reflective coating on the crystal, which means that then you get to look at the dial. Now this dial should be really pretty simple, but it's not. It has layers to it and everything. It's a very matte finish. It's a bit like if you see the Sea Dwellers from Rolex that have a very matte finish to the dial. This is even more matte. Certainly no reflections whatsoever going on with it. And the GS logo is actually applied, but it's so thin that I had to look through a loop to see if it was applied or not, but it is, and it's brushed. The hands are brushed as well, and they have like this perfect brush finish to them. There's no sort of wavy lines, nothing like that. Absolutely perfect. You then have the markers around the dial, which are obviously full of lume, but they also have highly polished metal around them. Now I doubt it's going to be anything like white gold like you would find on a Rolex, but it is incredibly polished. It's flat polished, and you just basically don't get any of the usual wavy reflections that you would see. This thing just catches the light in such a nice way. It was a bit sunny today, and out in the sun, it just looked fantastic. It's a really, really pretty sort of diver's watch, and I know that's completely at odds. Most people want the diver's watches to be tool watches, but for me, like, comparing this to something like a Rolex Submariner would probably be quite a good comparison, because the Sea Dwellers, they tend to not be too flashy or too reflective. This watch has such luster to it that you have to start comparing it to something that is a bit more of a dress diver, even though that this is an absolute, proper, full-on professional diver's watch. But it also, I feel, could look very good with a suit. It's so shiny in the right places, but not over the top. The other thing as well is all the shapes to the case. So you have like a sort of tonneau shape that goes into a very sort of scalloped section here, and it just looks amazing. You even have the holes in the case, so you can take the bracelet off really easily. That's obviously quite a well-known Seiko thing anyway, and has been around on other watches, of course. But the bezel itself as well has a really nice smooth turn to it. It's very, very easy to grip. It has a real sort of like relief to the grip side of it. So I'm pretty sure that if you were diving, you're underwater and you had your gloves on, I'm pretty sure you would have no worries at all absolutely grabbing onto this bezel. Getting onto the movement, now this movement is also the same that's in this watch. So obviously it's a 9R65 movement, and it's been around for a few years, because this watch here was purchased in 2008 and this one is 2018, so 10 years at least. I don't know too much about the history of the movements, but it's obviously been around a good while. However, they did such a good job of it in the first place that it seems to be absolutely fine that it's still here in the same guise. At the end of the day, we have a movement here that has a 72-hour power reserve. So you have this power reserve on the dial, which I know not everybody likes, but actually it does seem fitting to the watch. And I think if it didn't have it, it wouldn't have enough interest on the dial. So it does add interest to the dial. And it's split into 3 sections as well. So it has like a white, then a grey, then a black section to it. So obviously 72 hours is 3 days. So you can kind of look at it from a day perspective rather than a percentage perspective. The movement is incredible. It's an automatic movement, and as far as I'm aware, they basically get rid of like the balance area of a standard automatic movement, and they replace this area with quartz crystals, and not just any quartz crystals, of course. It is the highest of the high quartz quality that you can get. And what this allows is an incredibly fast beat rate, where the movement is basically trying to break itself, like not break itself as in break something, as in slow itself down. And that's how it keeps the accuracy, which is rated at 15 seconds per month. Now, that's on paper. Most people find that their Grand Seikos get around about no deviance or 2 seconds a month. So obviously we're looking at an incredibly accurate watch. You have this incredibly smooth seconds hand that just sweeps round. I mean, only Rolex could only dream of getting something this smooth. This is a very, very, very fast rate that it's going around. I think it works out around about 28,800 beats per hour. But it's so smooth that it just doesn't look like it has any judder whatsoever. And when you first start the movement, it actually accelerates for a few seconds and then it slows down to this sort of rate. It's a really cool thing to see when the watch hasn't had any power in it. All of a sudden it sort of accelerates and goes really, really fast and looks like it's going double to triple the speed. And then it slows down and then you get this beautiful sort of sweep. The luminescence is genuinely nuts. It's as good as you would ever imagine on a Seiko diver. Seiko divers have always been well known for their luminescence. This glows like a green colour, but the actual colour of the lume is white. Now normally you find that when a lume is a white colour, it's a certain type of lume that doesn't tend to glow that well in the dark. And you'll see here that on this watch, hopefully it comes through, but this lume just as normal. This isn't actually like glowing at the minute because we're under a light or anything. This is actually, the colour of this lume is like a more of a greeny colour. Now this is very, very powerful watch for luminescence. So I expected that because it's white lume on this that it might not be so good, but actually it's just as good. It's really, really powerful lume. It's the watch that you would buy. Well, I'll tell you why I bought it. The reason is because I'm a bit sick of the whole Rolex scenario. I mean, I have actually been after a Rolex Submariner, but if I ring any of the dealers, they basically laugh in your face here at the minute. 6 months wait, 12 months wait. If you buy one, we'll keep the warranty card back, blah, blah, blah. It becomes like a pretentious prospect to go buying a watch, and that's, for me, no fun whatsoever, and I'm sure for a lot of people it isn't any fun. But I'm not going to go into that in great detail, but what I mean is that if I go and buy a watch, I want it to be a nice experience. I want it to be a fun experience. I'll collect watches. You know, these are all things that we don't need. We can tell the time on our iPhone. So we want it to be a fun prospect when we go in search of a watch. And although I bought this online and it arrived via the internet and via the post, it was still a really exciting thing because I get that day's wait where I'm waiting for the watch. I then get the the whole scenario of opening the watch and seeing for the first time how it looks, and it's just fun because there was no pretentious aspect to it. It was just a nice simple process of buying a watch that I fancied, that I wanted, and I'm very, very happy with the results. So for me, that's one reason to buy a watch like this, to go away from brands that are having difficulty in achieving the supply for the demand. So that's one reason. And the other reason as well is that really I've kind of been round the clock with all these watches. I've had pretty much every brand out there that I actually want. I've had a lot of watches from each different brand. I have a good collection at the moment, quite a few watches. And I wanted something different, and I wanted also something that's a bit more understated than your average Rolex. I'm going to be traveling soon, and I was thinking of it from that perspective. If I'm walking around with my gold Rolex Daytona, then it's an instant alarm signal for any would-be thief, and sometimes that puts me off. But in this case, this is a watch that it costs money. Yes, it costs a lot of money, and I'll talk about that as well. But it's also a watch that isn't going to attract the wrong type of attention, because to most people this is just a Seiko, but to the people in the know it's more than just a Seiko. Now the price point is a bit of a point of contention. This is a £5,500 watch. That is a lot of money. When you compare it to other Seikos, there is a lot going on here, but is it worth 10 times the price of a really good standard Seiko diver? I'm not sure it is, but only you can make your mind up about that. For me, when I say I'm not sure, I think that the level of detail is incredible. The level of hand polishing, hand assembly, this is what you get at 5 times the price of this. So really, in terms of its assembly and polishing, it's cheap. But it's also, brand does play a part. As we know, and this is not a Patek Philippe, this is not a Lange, this is a Grand Seiko, and what price is acceptable is, like I say, down to you. I got this in a sale, and I felt that the price that I paid for it was acceptable, but I wouldn't buy this watch at the full RRP, so that's your choice. But I do feel the price that I pay for it, which is a good bit less than RRP, but not a huge amount less, but that sort of felt right to me. It put it in the bracket more of Planet Oceans from Omega than it did Rolex Submariner. And for me, I feel that the Rolex Submariner is a great proposition at any price because it holds its value so well. This watch won't hold its value as well. So this watch would hold its value probably similar to something like an Omega Planet Ocean, and therefore I look at it from that prospect as well. The thing that really has surprised me with this watch is the dimensions. So as I said at the beginning of this long review, I'm sorry it's taking so long, but I want to just go into all the details of it. When I first started looking for this watch, the dimensions that came up were 44.2 millimeters. Now that's the diameter, and that is something that I always say on my channel is absolutely useless, and this watch absolutely proves that fact. 44.2 millimeters is basically what they say the deep sea is. They say the deep sea is about 44 millimeters. Now I have a deep sea here, so I've got James Cameron deep sea here. Now if you're wondering why it has all the stickers on, it's exactly because of the dimensions. Unfortunately for my wrist, this watch is just a bit too big, and although I absolutely love it, I never wear it. So I've kept it in the stickers because I don't really want to sell it, because I see it as a good a good watch down the line that's going to hold its value. So there doesn't seem to be any point in selling it, but I don't wear it, and it's because of the dimensions. So these are two 44 millimeter watches. Okay, so side by side, that's how they look. And at first glance, this might actually look very similar, but let me show you the difference in the dimensions. So the deep sea, we have, if I can get it there, around about 44 millimeters as we expected. So let me just get it bang on. So I'm getting 44, 45. If I do it there, it even comes up as a 42 millimeter watch that way. So, you know, that's how the diameter works. But what it doesn't take into account is, first of all, this watch, the Deep Sea, which is an incredible watch. I absolutely love it, but it's 17 millimeters, 17.5 millimeters thick. Okay, so that's a thick watch. This is also 3,900 meters water resistant, but what I'm getting at here is the on-paper diameter dimensions that the manufacturers give us. The length of the watch, the length of the watch head, is 52 millimeters, but actually, if you look at it from the bracelet, from the end link, it actually works out to nearly 55 and a half or so millimeters. So as a result of that, it makes it too wide or too long to wear on a wrist like mine, and it looks big. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still sometimes wear it and I think, or I try it on and I think, you know, that's not too big, it's fine. But I'm probably just tricking myself. But it's not terrible, it's just that it is a big watch. Everyone knows the Deep Sea is a big watch. Now, if we take into account there, so we've got 55.5 millimeters for the length, we've got 17.5 millimeters or so for the height, and we know it's around about 42 to 44 millimeters, 45 millimeters in the diameter, depending on where you exactly measure it from. So on this watch here, this is now the Seiko, we have, just going to get that correct, so again, depends where you put your calipers. Basically, it's not always correct to the manufacturers, but we can go there and we can get to around about 43.5 mils. Okay, so that is about right. The height, so we're at 17.5 on the Deep Sea, 14 millimeters on this one. Okay, so it doesn't sound like a lot, 3.5 millimeters, but it does on a watch. It really is. These little millimeters make all the difference. And then the actual length of the watch, so the length of the case is just over 50 millimeters, so not terrible at all. And if you look at it in the same perspective, so at the end link, basically 53. So again, big differences that make enough of a difference for it to wear on a wrist like mine, which I only have a 6.75 inch wrist. If I just move these out of the way, you can see how it wears. And for me personally, and for everybody that's seen it so far, everybody has said how well it wears. It doesn't seem to be too big. It's just about on the limits of what I can wear, but you'll notice it does have sort of curve to the bracelet over my wrist. So you can sometimes tell if a watch is too big because the bracelet will just literally drop down either side, and that's what happens with the Deep Sea. But on this watch, that doesn't happen. So the dimensions are incredibly misleading, and I've also, in a lot of the reviews that I've read, the dimensions are incredibly misleading. I think this is really a testament to the type of watch that you have to try on. You know, you have to see it at the local Grand Seiko store that, you know, is near to you, and you have to really try it out. But what I would say is that you aren't going to get the full gist of Grand Seiko by trying it in a store. I've done it myself. I've tried these watches out in a store, looked at them, and they just don't quite show the full brand by looking at one in a store. First of all, it's not under natural light, and second of all, it's just too quick. You're going to feel under pressure because the sales staff are there. It's a watch that you need to wear and then you get it. You know, that's kind of how it is. So apart from a few idiosyncrasies, like I say, with the bezel and things like that, this watch is really a perfect dive watch without a doubt. There's nothing really at this price point that will touch it for finishing. There's nothing that will touch it for such an understated sort of watch from a premium manufacturer. And it's a really, really unique prospect. So I hope I've opened your eyes to Grand Seiko, or certainly this watch. I'm sorry the review's gone on so long, but I think certain watches demand a long review. It's half an hour of your life, and you know, hopefully it's something that you will enjoy. But please make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Please make sure you hit the bell icon when you subscribe so you know exactly when I bring new videos out, and give me a thumbs up on the video if you liked it. And secondly, if you're on Instagram, you can check out my Instagram, which is @WatchHobbyist. You'll see all my latest watches on there. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.